When it comes to 4X gaming, Civilization can be seen as the undisputed king. However, there have been various notable titles to come along and try to shake up the genre for better or for worse. This brings us to one of the most ambitious 4X games that I've played recently called Old World. It not only has elements from the aforementioned Civilization series with its hexagonal map design, but also elements from Paradox games like Crusader Kings and Europa Universalis. This game is definitely doing a lot here, but does the gamble pay off? As a disclaimer, I was given a free code by Hooded Horse to review, and while I do appreciate the free copy, it will not deter me from a fair and honest review. Sounds good? Let's begin. When starting up a game, you can pick from one of 8 leaders, each representing a faction. Similar to Civilization and other 4X games, each have their own unique traits such as starting tech, unique military units, and percentage bonuses to things such as researching and making that cash money, boy. For this review, I went with Babylonia, who has a leader name I can't pronounce at all. After picking your character, you can then adjust the parameters of the game. You can use either the simple setup or the advanced setup. I went with the advanced setup as you can customize a ton of variables to your liking. I always like when games give you so many options like this. It goes a long way for replayability. The game then begins giving you a brief overview of who you are and how to begin your civilization. You'll first need to settle to create your first base, which will be your capital. The unique part about this is how you don't just create a city and be done with it. Instead, you need to dedicate the city to one of 4 houses. Each will give the base its own benefits, and it's also important to make sure all houses have the same amount of bases to keep them content. More on the political system later on. Once you build your base, you're told about orders and can pick your next technology to research. Regarding orders, these are points that you need in order to perform certain actions. Things like changing the production of a city won't require it, but moving units, terraforming, and personal actions will take up points. It took me a while to adjust to this as I'm used to being able to move all of my units without the need of a system prior. I believe this was done to prevent snowballing, but any good player will figure out how to maximize their actions, especially since leftover points can roll over into the next turn. Hopefully your base is surrounded by many natural resources. If not, you can always send your scouts to explore and collect various resources, which there are a ton of. Gold, food, iron, stone, and wood are all important for producing units and expanding your towns. They're also important for upkeep as well, so make sure that you never run out of them. Eventually, you will run into another faction. Depending on what you have researched will allow different actions to take place diplomatically. This is also when I found out that the AI starts out with at least 1 or 2 more settlements than you. Thankfully, I was able to catch up and eventually surpass them. But yeah, regarding diplomacy, you won't have many options to begin with. All you can really do early on is trade with factions and go to war. Later on, however, you can set up alliances, non-aggression pacts, arrange marriages, and even vassalize other factions. You also notice that the game has both major factions and minor tribes to deal with. Both can be manipulated to your liking depending on what victory condition you are aiming for. As expected, combat plays a role within the game whether or not you are trying to go for that conquest victory. Since the game is focused on ancient warfare, those are the type of units that will aid you in battle. Attacking a unit involves clicking on one of your units and issuing the command. Depending on the type of unit, terrain, and other factors determine the amount of casualties you will inflict and may receive. For example, a spearman unit is far more effective fighting cavalry versus an archer shooting from below. Other units like catapults take a bit more planning to use as they first need to deploy themselves so they can fire next turn. Overall, it's a familiar yet decent system. Eventually, I was growing old and tired. The doctors and the Divine One stated that I have 1 turn left to cement my legacy and pass on to a new generation. Thankfully, I've been raising my family during this time and nominated my daughter to be my heir to the throne. I can't lie, I was a bit nervous about what to expect. I was getting serious Crusader Kings vibes, worrying about how much my new leader would be hated and how the families may turn their back on me. It is true that relationships to the new ruler may alter how other nations view you diplomatically, as well as the internal families. However, I am happy to report that I didn't experience any civil wars during this game or really any major internal strife. I was honestly surprised that the game made it seem like internal politics will be on the level of the aforementioned Crusader Kings series. Instead, it seems that many of your family members want to see the nation succeed, which is always heartwarming to witness. For the political system, there will be events that pop up that may require you to favor one house over another. I did my best balancing the relationships of the houses and not upsetting one too much over the other, and once again didn't have any issues. I can't confirm if this becomes more of a necessity in harder difficulties. You can also take members of your court and add them into certain roles as you advance in your civilization. These can perform tasks of diplomatic and espionage to your benefit. Whether or not they will succeed is dependent on the stats of the person assigned. Despite all the fun features and amount of fun that I am having throughout the game, game, the late slog unfortunately does become part of life, as many strategy games suffer from this fate as well. For me, it was when I defeated Greece and became the most powerful faction by a long shot. I was on good terms with the tribes as well as the other factions. Even if they did want to challenge me, they would quickly be put back in their place. After all my heirs and all my successors, it ultimately came down to Quid Ublanu the New to complete the 10th and final ambition to win the game. These ambitions are basically goals that the ruler can set. I was initially trying to go for either technological or diplomatic, but it ended up being that way. I do appreciate the many victory conditions to achieve and can lead to some interesting strategies. Presentation wise, I do enjoy the art style and the graphics overall. The character portraits in particular look great, and I like seeing my character age as the years go by. The music on the other hand is a very mixed bag. Some of the songs included fit the game perfectly, and the choice of instruments used are perfect. Others, however, feel like they belong in a completely different game and give off a low budget indie vibe. I know this isn't a AAA title, but some of these tracks would be better off removed from the final game. The last thing I want to talk about are the various scenarios included in the Heroes of the Aegean DLC. As stated by the title, the scenarios focuses on conflicts around the Aegean Sea. There are 6 scenarios included, with the last one allowing you to play as one of the 4 successor states after the death of Alexander the Great. These scenarios are far more linear than the traditional game, providing objectives that must be met in order to accomplish them. They will also need to be completed in order, which is a bit of a disappointment since I would rather just play as one of the Diadachi. It reminds me of having to go through the whole prologue campaign just to play as the USA in a grand campaign in Empire Total War. I wasn't a fan of it then, and I'm still not a fan of it now. I really would only recommend these scenarios if you are looking for more linear sets of missions to play. Overall, it's a very well made game that does a solid job balancing traditional 4X gameplay with features found in grand strategy titles. The level of complexity is great, the amount of victory conditions add a ton of replay value, and the additional elements not usually seen in other 4X games is a nice touch. Unfortunately, it does suffer from late game slog found in many 4X games, and it can be overwhelming to novice 4X gamers. The king of 4X gaming will always be Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri for me, but this one I can recommend for those looking for a more historic 4X game of ancient warfare. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a ton more games to do and a backlog that needs to be worked on. Thank you guys for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.